Okay, so you've just published your summer report, and I think one of the key findings was that the pandemic showed that the disaster recovery, business continuity plans for a lot of data centers were found wanting. I guess the obvious question there is, how much can we excuse that? Because obviously the pandemic's hopefully a once in a lifetime event, and how much did it highlight that there are underlying problems with some of those plans which shouldn't have been there in any case?
Yeah, I mean, there's two specific parts to this. The first being obviously that the pandemic is a once in a generation, once in a lifetime event. I mean, the last one was back with Spanish flu. The second part of it is that most disaster recovery and business recovery plans were based on a kind of a tick box mentality. So they were very much answering specific questions that were directed towards shorter, more actionable outages, and certainly localized outages and not global outages. However, what it has shown is that a lot of these disaster recovery plans had no actionable detail behind them. And in terms of implementing them, there was no plans around accelerated working, home working. The issues around connectivity weren't particularly addressed. And the fact is that not many of them had kept up with the changes and paces of change in technology. So it was a very much on the shelf type of approach, which was found wanting in most areas.
Okay, and I guess a follow-up to that, do you think many, if not all, organisations are therefore sort of reevaluating those plans to update them for some of those things you've highlighted?
I think almost certainly any business in today's environment will do that as a matter of course. And I think one of the things that will be looked at is how technology has been used and how that can actually be weaved into future disaster recovery plans and business continuity plans, because I don't think necessarily businesses were prepared for the amount of home working and for the amount of disruption that took place.
Okay, and moving on, another finding in the report was, I think there's a suggestion that there's going to be a significant drop in in-house data center space usage or provision of that. Is that a reflection of what people are calling the new or the next normal with all the home working, flexible working? Or how do you sort of characterize that sort of trend?
Again, I mean, that is certainly an element of the fact that a more flexible approach will be taken to working going forward. I don't think there'll be the mass home working that we've got at the moment by any means, but certainly I think in terms of we've seen with Barclays, we've seen with Nationwide, these are the types of organisations, large organisations that are looking at their footprints. Managing in-house data is expensive and it takes up quite a lot of room in terms of real estate. What we also have is the realisation that data centres and access to the internet are also becoming part of the national infrastructure. So therefore, that's being deployed onto a national network rather than localized areas where access could be problematic in situations like these.
Okay, and in terms of the actual data center build program, whether it's in-house or maybe even cloud and colos, I think the report highlights that there's maybe a bit of caution moving forward. Is that just, again, part of the overall picture where we're all a little bit nervous as to what's around the corner? Or were there some sort of underlying trends that this sort of current situation has served just to exaggerate?
I think there's a natural conservatism in terms of outlook when something like this happens, because obviously there's no blueprint for it. There's no real experience of it and how we can come out of this, and therefore that drives a certain amount of reticence in the future and the opportunities going forward. However, if we look at underneath drivers and underneath trends, and you look at things like Netflix, which has added more than 16 million subscribers in the last 2 months. You've got Zoom, which is now 300 million subscribers. You've got Microsoft Teams that are adding 12 million users daily. And if you just look at the average bandwidth that's required throughout this, which has increased 38% per household, that underlying trend really drives towards the fact that I can't really see any slowdown in the requirement for space. So whilst there'll be a reticence, yes, but the underlying trends, the underlying factors, I think will continue to drive the growth in the data center sector and the data center space. I mean, if you look at the likes of Microsoft, the likes of AWS, the likes of Alphabet, they are continuing to take up any space that is spare. And this is driving a demand that is outstripping supply. So I think there will be a step back while we understand new ways of working and how we can implement the bringing online of new space. And then we'll see the trend continue in terms of that requirement for supply.
And in terms of specifically, you referenced the sort of AWSs and some of the outsourcing. I think the report highlights that outsourcing sort of demand is fairly steady at the moment. I mean, that may be not that surprising, or maybe is. I mean, do you anticipate whether that's going to change a lot, or and if so, why, or do you think it'll carry on as is?
I think again, there's been a realization that we're not using technology to its full potential, and we're also realizing the fact that technology is best dealt with experts. So again, it comes to the fact that in-house data centers, in-house provision, that's not a core business requirement. However, we have now many facilities that it is core business and can offer it as a service. So I think you're going to see a continuing trend to that, and I think that will continue no matter what. And there are other factors coming in here. I mean, we will start looking at the way production happens with artificial intelligence in terms of building in business resilience and how that functionality can be maintained through something of this nature. So I think there's going to be a greater trend towards kind of cloud and edge to cater with this, and also to facilitate better experiences for consumers, you know, in homes with Netflix streaming, Amazon streaming, game streaming, things of that nature. And also, I don't really see a downward trend in online shopping. So again, that will fuel this localized approach.
Yeah, you referenced the edge there. I mean, can you just give us a bit more of your expert? I know the edge has been around for a while, and you know it's the best thing since sliced bread or not, depending. But can you give us some indication? I mean, with this new way of working, I think most people accept that there's going to be a bit more home working, flexible working. Presumably, the edge has a significant role to play, and therefore, edge type facilities are only going to increase.
Absolutely. And again, yes, there's a response to the more flexible approach in working, the bandwidth demand, and the different lifestyles that are now being acted. But in addition to that, what we're seeing is a lot of onshoring of data. What we're seeing is global supply chains have been impacted. That has massive impacts on production, etc. And what we're seeing again is that onshoring of data to make sure that they've got the local response to a global issue. So again, that onshoring of data will add to the other circumstances that we have in really driving that edge deployment.
Okay, and you referenced the supply chain. I guess there are the two bits. The bit maybe you alluded to, and you maybe want your data center much nearer to where you are located, whether you're a consumer or a business, but also the actual kitting out of a data center supply chain. Has the current scenario put any stresses on that? You know, if you're expecting to get a load of cooling equipment from the Far East or something, can you just give us some idea on any impact that might have had on data center build? And
again, the last kind of 10, 15, 20 years, we've concentrated on a globalized supply chain. So centers of excellence, centers of production. As you quite rightly alluded to there, I mean, for example, there's a lot of equipment that comes in from the Far East. Italy's a recognised centre for things like air handling units, air conditioning units and things of that nature, and so on and so forth. So again, I think where businesses have gone to have a really streamlined approach in terms of their supply chain, I think we're going to see that widening out. And again, it's going to be for protection of productivity going forward, and to enable production to carry on despite any global issues. And we mustn't forget that, you know, scientists have said we've had warnings previous to this with other outbreaks such as, you know, Ebola, MERS, SARS, etc. And there was only a report 2 weeks ago that there was a potential another virus found in China. So this could happen again. And we're also likely to experience significant spikes over the winter unless we can get a vaccine in place. So it really is imperative that businesses start looking how they manage those supply chains going forward.
Okay, and we talked a bit about business continuity, disaster recovery. So I'm guessing that is a pretty critical thing that people, as I say, they had a bit of a rude awakening for, with the pandemic. It's pretty critical that people do address this ongoing in terms of whether, say, it's the supply chain, where your data center is that's hosting your data, etc. Can you just, what did the sort of report tell us about that, I guess?
Well, and again, I think one of the things is that everybody's been able to take a step back in terms of look at those types of operations. And undoubtedly, disaster recovery, business continuity will look completely different going forward. As you've alluded to there, this was a wake-up call. And I think many businesses, certainly in the first few weeks, struggled with empowering their employees, keeping production going, etc., etc. And again, I come back to the point, the fact that what this pandemic has shown is that we have not been using technology to its absolute fullest potential. And we're starting to now. So I think we're going to see disaster recovery, business continuity, absolutely embracing that change. But more importantly, I think going forward, it has to have a regular review, regular look at, so it's keeping pace with the technology that's available. Because I think what certainly caught a lot of people unawares was the fact that their business continuity plans are reviewed ad hoc and do not keep pace with developments within the technology sector that can help their businesses in situations such as this.
Excellent. We covered a fair amount of ground. Were there any other findings from the report that you'd like to highlight, or have we covered most of the main ones?
I think those were the main ones. But again, I think if you start looking at the underlying trends, what becomes very, very apparent, and I've mentioned it a few times within this interview, is the fact that we are now starting to grips with what technology can help us with. I think previously we've been a bit standoffish, big brother, it's intruding on our lives, but actually if it's used in the right way, in the right manner, it can enhance our lives, and it can help us from a business perspective be more adaptive, be more agile, and be more responsive. So looking at all of that and taking the report as a whole, I think there are many opportunities that this presents the sector going forward. And I think it's now incumbent upon us really to start shaping those opportunities, grasping those opportunities, and delivering on those opportunities. So whilst we're in very troubled times, I think there is cause for measured optimism. And I think, it's now down to us to really deliver on that.
Okay, and I'm just who do you think's best placed to drive it? Clearly, the end users have a set of needs which they've identified. You have the colos, and I guess there are folks in the middle that can hook them up. How do you sort of characterize is there an optimized way, if you like, of using these new technologies?
I think there are the strands that are out there, and what we have at the moment is that there's a realization and there's a need, and these will now start coming together. I think there needs to be greater communication between end users and providers in terms of what the abilities are there, and how they can be enabled and how they can be used. Because generally what's been happening is that product goes onto market and the end users have adapted to it. Now what I can see happening is a far closer collaboration in terms of how those developed, how those are marketed, and how those are put to market. But from our point of view, what's absolutely critical in all this is the underlying infrastructure, because if you don't have the underlying infrastructure, it simply can't be delivered. So again, that's where I come to. I think that's where our absolute opportunity is to get that infrastructure absolutely right, and get it working for those customers that need it.
Okay, that's brilliant. Appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.